Peter, can I ask you a question?
You and your questions.
Well, when you pray,
Yeah?
there's just something unique about the way you pray. It's like you could just sit there and talk to God forever.
If you only knew
Knew what?
how I used to pray.
Well, you couldn't have been that bad. You were with Jesus, right?
I remember one evening as we were leaving Jerusalem. I was with Jesus and the other disciples, and Jesus led us off to a garden, Gethsemane.
That was just before he was crucified.
Yes, it was right after the Passover meal. Anyway, there's something you need to understand about Jesus. He knew more about prayer than anybody I've ever known. It didn't matter if it was morning, afternoon, or evening, he was always praying. And there were certain places that he liked to pray more than others. Anyway, he took James, John, and myself further on into the garden and asked us to pray with him.
What happened?
He told us to pray and keep watch. It's as though he was expecting someone else.
What did you do?
Well, we watched as Jesus went off a little bit further and knelt down and began to pray like I'd never seen him pray before. And if you wanted to know how to pray, you could just watch Jesus. Anyway, it had been a very hard day, and I was very tired, but I knew I had to stay up and pray. Before I knew it, I began to fall asleep.
So let me get this straight. You were with Jesus just before he was to be betrayed. He asked you to pray, and you fell asleep?
It sounds terrible, doesn't it? He came back, and he was very upset. I felt worthless. I felt like I'd betrayed him right then and there. So I told myself, I'm not going to fall asleep again. I'm not going to fall asleep. So I began to pray, and before I knew it, I was falling asleep.
Wait, you're telling me that you didn't just fall asleep once, but you fell asleep twice?
You don't have to rub it in.
What happened after that?
Guess.
He asked you to pray again, and you fell asleep again?
Yes, Mr. Expert Prayer Warrior himself. He's not always such an expert prayer warrior.
I get it. You weren't always good at praying, but something had to have changed.
A lot has changed. But you know what's made praying a lot easier?
No, what?
He's no longer here. I mean, this man that I lived with, walked, and followed for those years is no longer physically present, but I can still talk to him. And not like I'm talking to somebody way out there. Like I'm talking to a close personal friend. Somebody who knows me personally.
But what about me? I never met him.
That's just it. He's given us his Holy Spirit to help us pray, living right inside you. How incredible is that?
I never thought about it that way. You know, I guess it sounded a little bad earlier when we were talking about you falling asleep. I'll admit, I've fallen asleep while I was praying before too.
Haven't we all? But we all have to start somewhere, don't we?